I had just finished a 14-hour shift at the hospital when I pulled into my grandfather's gravel driveway, still wearing my scrubs and carrying the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones. The sun was setting behind the old Kansas fields, turning everything gold except the knot forming in my stomach. Family dinners were never dinners, they were arenas. I could already hear Derek's laugh coming from inside, loud and careless, in that way people sound when they know they will never be held accountable. When I stepped through the door, the smell of roasted turkey and sweet potatoes nearly covered the tension in the room, but not enough to fool me. My mother glanced up first. Her smile was stiff practiced and about as warm as the refrigerator. "You are late, Rachel," she said, as if I had a choice in the matter. My father gave a small nod without meeting my eyes. Derek leaned back in his chair with a beer in hand, eyeing me the way a cat eyes a bird that forgot it had wings. "Another long day saving people," he said. "Shame you cannot fix your own life." Grandpa Arthur sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, watching everyone the way a judge watches a jury he already knows is lying. He smiled at me, though a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "Sit down, sweetheart. We waited for you." I took the seat next to him because it was the only place in the room that ever felt remotely safe. My mother immediately reached across the table to pile food onto my plate. "You look tired," she said. "Maybe nursing is too much for you." She said it as kindly as a wolf might tell a rabbit to relax. Derek chuckled. "She looks tired because she is always alone. No man wants to date someone who works nights and cries all the time." Dad cleared his throat quietly the way he always did when he wanted to intervene, but never would. I forced myself to breathe. This was normal. This was the script. My family delivered the same lines every time I came home, as if the past 30 years had been a rehearsal for one long performance. Grandpa lifted his fork, let it hover over his plate for a moment, then slowly set it down. The room stilled, not because he raised his voice, but because he did not need to. He reached to the floor beside him, lifted his old metal lockbox, and placed it on the table. The air changed. My mother froze mid-reach, her hand still hovering over the mashed potatoes. My father sat straighter, shoulders tightening. Derek frowned in confusion. Grandpa looked at me. "Rachel," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Did you ever receive the letter about your trust fund?" Silverware clattered. Derek's beer slipped from his hand and rolled across the table. My mother's face emptied of color. My father stared at his plate as if waiting for it to open and swallow him whole. I blinked, thinking I must have misheard him. "My what letter?" I asked. "My trust." What I never knew I had anything with the word trust attached to it. Grandpa unlocked the box with an old brass key. The latch clicked, and that small sound hit the room like a fault line cracking under our feet. "Your trust fund letter," he repeated. "The annual update they should have forwarded to you years ago." My mother shot him a sharp look. Dad opened his mouth, then shut it again like a fish pulled from water. I felt heat rise in my chest, a pulse of something that was not anger yet but was close. "I never got a letter," I said quietly. "What is he talking about, Mom?" She spoke too fast. "Banks make mistakes, Rachel. Grandpa does not understand how these things work." Derek snorted. "Since when does she get a trust fund?" "What about me, Mom?" There it was. The first flicker of truth. Not concern, not surprise, fear of losing something. I turned to Grandpa. "What trust fund?" He reached into the lockbox and pulled out a stack of envelopes bound with an aging rubber band. He placed them in front of me. Each one had my name printed neatly on the front. Each one was sealed. Each one had never reached me. These were mailed every year, he said. Sent to the address your mother provided for you. My mouth went dry. "That cannot be right," I whispered. "Mom, you never gave these to me." "Why?" She lifted her chin as if preparing for battle. "Because you were too emotional to handle financial matters. You always were." Derek laughed into his beer. "Figures." My father finally spoke, but his voice cracked. "Denise, maybe we should not." My mother silenced him with a single glare. I reached for the top envelope. My hands trembled so badly I could barely get a grip. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Like it carried 12 years of weight. I slid my finger under the flap, but my mother reached across the table fast, her hand clamping around my wrist harder than necessary. "You do not need to open that," she hissed. The room shifted. Derek set down his beer. My father stared at her hand on my arm, and for the first time in my life, I saw something different in his eyes. Not fear, not guilt. Recognition. He knew. Grandpa's voice cut through the air. "Let go of her, Denise!" My mother's fingers tightened before she finally released me. The spot she grabbed throbbed. I opened the envelope with shaking fingers. My name was printed clearly inside. Rachel Monroe, Beneficiary Annual Trust Summary. My breath caught. My vision blurred. I looked up at Grandpa, but his expression only confirmed what my heart already knew. I was never supposed to see this. The room felt small. Too small. All the years I worked double shifts. All the holidays I stayed home because I could not afford gas. All the times Mom said we were barely getting by. All the times Derek got new things while I counted coins for groceries. My mother folded her arms. We did what was best for the family. I stared at the untouched food on my plate, at the envelopes that held a life I could have lived, at the family who decided I did not need to know. And then I said the only words that felt true. I never knew it existed. I grew up in a neighborhood where the lawns were cut short, but the secrets were tall, where every house looked peaceful on the outside, but carried a storm behind the front door. Ours was a small, worn, two-story place in a suburb outside Kansas City, the kind where people wave from their driveways but close their blinds as soon as they step inside. Children played in the cul-de-sacs, dogs barked behind wooden fences, and families attended church on Sundays because that was what respectable families did. But respectability was just a coat of paint overwrought, and no one knew that better than I did. My mother, Denise Monroe, had a way of speaking that turned even normal sentences into weapons. She never yelled, not like other mothers in the neighborhood whose arguments could be heard through thin walls on humid summer nights. No, her voice stayed soft, polite, and cold enough to bruise. Whenever I cried as a child, she would shake her head slowly and say, "You are too sensitive, Rachel," or "You are being dramatic again," or "You make everything too complicated." It was gaslighting wrapped in maternal gentleness, and the worst part was that I believed her. Derek never believed her because he never needed to. In my mother's eyes, my brother could do no wrong. He was the golden boy, the miracle son, the one she showed off to neighbors and co-workers. He got new sneakers every school year, even when money was supposedly tight. I got hand-me-downs from thrift stores that still smelled faintly of other people's detergent. He got birthday parties with balloons and sheet cakes shaped like footballs. I got simple dinners at home where Mom would forget the candles, then blame me for not reminding her. The smallest conflicts always ended the same way. Derek pushing me as we walked to the bus stop. Derek yanking my backpack straps until I stumbled. Derek flicking my ear during dinner when Dad and Mom pretended not to notice. Once he grabbed a handful of my hair and pulled it so hard my eyes watered. When I shouted, "Stop!" he smirked and said, "Calm down, you are being dramatic." My mother nodded at him as if he had just recited scripture. Another time when I was 12, I came home with a B+ on a math test. I thought she would be proud. I had studied for days replaying multiplication rules in my head every night before bed. Instead, she slapped me so fast I did not see her hand move. She said the grade was a disappointment, a reflection of my lack of effort, and that I needed discipline. Derek brought home a report card with a D in the same subject that same month. Mom cupped his cheek, laughed, and said, "Good try, honey, maybe math is not your thing." Dad never contradicted her. He was a quiet man who worked long hours at the warehouse and returned home each night with shoulders rounded and eyes tired. He would eat dinner silently while Mom talked at him, and Derek bragged about things he did not do. If I ever tried to speak, Mom would interrupt or redirect the conversation toward Derek. Over time, I learned how to disappear without leaving the room. I would sit at the table, chew my food slowly, and exist as quietly as possible to avoid new reasons for criticism. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, pressing my face into a pillow so no one would hear me. The only person who noticed was our neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, a woman in her 40s who lived 2 houses down. Her yard was always full of flowers, and she had a habit of calling me sweetheart, even though we were not related. One afternoon, she found me sitting on the curb trying to stop my nose from bleeding, after Derek pushed me too hard during a game of tag. She knelt, dabbed my nose with a tissue, and whispered, "You deserve better than what they give you." It was the first time anyone had ever said something like that to me, and I did not know what to do with the kindness. The only person inside my home who treated me with gentleness was Grandpa Arthur. He visited every month, often bringing small gifts like a book, a puzzle, or a pack of colored pencils. He always asked about school and listened to my answers without interrupting. He noticed when my smile was forced or when I flinched at sudden movements. He once asked me if everything was all right at home, and I panicked so badly I lied and said yes before he finished the question. He looked unconvinced but did not push further. When my 13th birthday arrived, my mother bought Derek a skateboard, even though it was my day, claiming she had found it on sale and it would be selfish not to get him one. She bought me nothing. Grandpa arrived later that day with a wrapped box containing a light blue sweater in my exact size and style. I still remember how it felt against my skin, soft in a way nothing else in our house ever was. Mom complained that he was spoiling me, but he did not care. I clung to that sweater for years like it was armor. As I grew older, the favoritism sharpened. Derek's messes were excused as boys being boys. My mistakes were treated like evidence of some deep flaw in my character. When I voiced opinions, Mom accused me of talking back. When I cried, Dad told me to stop making trouble. When I once stood up for myself against Derek, Mom grounded me for disrespect while Derek strutted around the house like a king who had defeated a challenger. The older I became, the more I understood that I had been raised in a system where love was conditional and fairness was optional. I learned that staying quiet was safer than speaking up, that shrinking myself was easier than taking up space, and that any attention I received from my family usually came wrapped in disapproval. Looking back now, sitting at that dinner table as an adult, I realized that my family had trained me from childhood to accept less, expect nothing, and question my own worth. And it worked. For 31 years, it worked. Until the night Grandpa opened his lockbox and asked a question that shattered the entire script. By the time I turned 31, my life looked nothing like the polished photos people posted online. While former classmates from high school were getting married, buying homes in newer suburbs, or taking vacations to places with turquoise water, I was surviving each month by juggling 12-hour and 14-hour shifts at St. Luke's Hospital in Kansas City. I had become a full-time ICU nurse, a job that demanded everything I had and then asked for more. People often assume nurses have stable lives, steady schedules, and comfortable salaries, but those people have never worked in a hospital that is chronically understaffed and drowning in patient loads. Some nights I barely had time to breathe, let alone eat. I became someone who kept protein bars in my scrub pockets and counted sleep in 90-minute increments between alarms. I chose nursing because I liked helping people, but I stayed because I needed the paycheck. Even then, it barely covered my bills. After 4 years of nursing school and taking out loans every semester, I graduated with $68,000 of student debt. The number felt unreal, like something that belonged to someone else. But every month when I opened my loan portal, the balance reminded me that I was chained to it whether I liked it or not. I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a landlord who ignored repair requests. My car was a beat-up Corolla with a door that sometimes refused to lock. My fridge was usually filled with inexpensive groceries that could last a week if I rationed them carefully. And every time I thought I was finally catching up on payments, something always happened. Sometimes it was a medical bill. Sometimes my car battery died. Sometimes it was a shift I had to take off because I had the flu, but still did not get enough sick leave. During those hard months, I always ended up transferring another $50 or $100 from my already thin savings, telling myself it would get better next month. But next month came, and then another, and somehow the hole never got shallower. My family never helped. They never offered, and even if they had, I would not have trusted their generosity. My mother liked to remind me that she and Dad were doing their best and that they could not afford to bail me out every time life got hard. Yet she always found money when Derek needed something. Derek was 29 and still living at home, working odd jobs and drinking through most weekends. My mother treated him like a prince who had lost his way. When he crashed his old truck, she bought him a used but decent F-150. When he drank too much and got into trouble, she called Dad to pick him up before the police arrived. When he quit yet another job, she said he was between opportunities and needed emotional support. Meanwhile, when I called to say I was struggling, she sighed into the phone and said I should learn to manage my money better. There were nights when she would call me at 11, just as I had fallen asleep before an early shift, and tell me to drive across town to pick up Derek from a bar. "He cannot drive," she would say. "You are the responsible one." I would drag myself out of bed, put on a jacket, and drive in the dark to find him leaning against the wall outside the bar with a smug grin on his face. He would climb into my passenger seat, smelling like alcohol and sweat, then make jokes about how pathetic I looked. "You know you will die alone if you keep working those hours," he once said. At the time, I thought the exhaustion was making me overly emotional, but now I know that his words landed the way they did because they came from someone who had been allowed to hurt me without consequence for decades. At work, I was valued. My supervisors knew I was dependable. Coworkers asked for my help. Patients thanked me. When I walked through the sliding doors of the ICU, I felt like someone with purpose. But the moment I left the hospital and returned to my own life, that feeling faded. I often sat in my car in the hospital parking lot after shifts, my head resting against the steering wheel, listening to the soft hum of the engine and the distant sound of helicopters from the trauma unit. I did not cry often, but on nights when a patient died, or when an emergency turned chaotic, or when I was simply too tired to pretend nothing hurt, tears slipped down my cheeks silently. No one saw. No one ever saw. My friends tried to stay in touch, but my schedule made it nearly impossible. I missed birthdays, baby showers, brunches, and holiday gatherings. I always meant to show up, but work always came first because rent always came first. I knew I was drifting into a life that felt smaller and smaller, but I kept telling myself it was temporary, that someday I would pay off my loans, that someday I would not dread opening my email, that someday everything would get better. I counted those somedays like prayer beads, but even in my worst moments, I never imagined I had money sitting in a trust fund, money that had been meant for me since I was a teenager, money that could have changed everything. Money that could have helped me avoid years of exhaustion and fear. The idea never once crossed my mind because my mother had spent my entire life telling me that we had nothing. She told me that money was tight, that food was expensive, that I needed to learn to do without. She said it so often that it became a truth I swallowed whole. She made sure I believed that I deserved less. If she had told me that the sky was green, I probably would have questioned my own eyesight. And so, I worked and struggled and sacrificed while Derek coasted through life on a cushion made of my mother's excuses and my father's silence. Every time Derek posted a picture with his truck or went to a concert or bought new sneakers, I wondered how they could afford it. When I asked my mother about it once, she said, "Not everything is your business, Rachel." After that, I stopped asking. I stopped expecting. I stopped hoping. I settled into a rhythm of survival, the kind of rhythm that becomes so familiar you do not even hear it anymore. Until the night my grandfather asked about a letter, I had never seen a letter that held the truth about why my life felt like a constant uphill climb, while my brother's path was paved with excuses and second chances. A letter that proved everything I had ever believed about myself was a lie crafted by the very people who were supposed to protect me. And in that moment, sitting at his dinner table, I realized that my adult life had been shaped not by fate, not by circumstance, but by a family who had designed my struggle. Walking back into the dining room after Grandpa's question felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone had forgotten their lines but was still trying to pretend they knew the script. The chandelier above the table cast a warm glow that did nothing to ease the tension settling over the room like a heavy blanket. My plate sat in front of my chair, untouched the turkey, cooling the cranberry sauce, already losing its shape. I slid back into my seat while my family attempted to recover their composure, though none of them were successful. My mother stood stiffly by the counter, smoothing the front of her blouse with frantic little movements that betrayed her calm expression. She always prided herself on her hosting skills, on creating the illusion of the perfect American family gathering. She loved arranging the turkey on her grandmother's platter, folding cloth napkins into triangles, and lighting candles she never allowed anyone to actually touch. Everything had to look picture perfect, even if the people at the table were falling apart inside. She turned from the counter and placed another scoop of sweet potatoes on my plate without asking. "You need to eat," she said. "You have lost weight. Nursing is too hard on you." It was almost comical that she could pivot from panicking over the trust fund to critiquing my weight in the same breath. Derek cracked open a new beer and leaned back in his chair as if none of this concerned him. His movements were sloppy, careless, the way they always got when he had too much to drink. "So, she gets money," he said loudly. He looked at me with the lazy confidence of someone who had been told his entire life that he was superior. Why would anyone give her anything? I ignored him, focusing instead on the way Grandpa watched everyone with an expression that was neither angry nor surprised, just tired. He had seen this family rot from the inside for years, and tonight was the first time he decided to pull aside the curtain. Dad shifted in his seat. He kept his eyes on the tablecloth, tracing the embroidery with his thumb. Every few seconds he opened his mouth like he wanted to say something but changed his mind before any sound came out. His silence was a familiar presence at the table, a piece of furniture as permanent as the wooden cabinets behind him. He had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight long before I ever learned how. Derek took a long drink from his beer and belched without shame. "So tell me again," he said. "Why does the little nurse get a trust fund and not the son who actually stayed home?" Mom pressed lips together, her nostrils flaring. "Derek, stop," she said, her voice cracked, betraying the strain. "This is not the time." But it was so much the time that ignoring it felt like an insult to reality. The room smelled like turkey herbs and something sour underneath, something like fear. That fake hospitality sat heavy in my stomach. Mom always used food as a disguise, a way to mask the fact that nothing underneath the mashed potatoes and holiday recipes was ever warm. I watched her lift the turkey knife to carve another slice even though no one was eating. The blade glinted under the chandelier and her hand trembled slightly. "You did not answer Grandpa's question," I said. My voice was calm, almost too calm. When had I become someone who had to control every syllable to keep from shaking? She froze at the cutting board. The knife hovered above the turkey. "I do not appreciate your tone," she said quietly. I was not using a tone. I was asking a question. Derek snorted. "Here we go. Daddy's little victim routine." Grandpa pushed his chair back slightly. "That is enough," he said. Just 3 words, but enough to silence the room. He rarely raised his voice. He did not have to. My mother turned toward him slowly. "Arthur, this is a private matter. This is not something to bring up during dinner." Grandpa lifted his eyebrows. "Private," he repeated. "Denise, I have sent those letters for over a decade. You have had every opportunity to tell her." She stiffened, her voice sharpened. "I did what I thought was best for the family." Derek slammed his beer on the table, making the plates rattle. "The family or you, Mom?" My father's head snapped upward, shocked that Derek had turned on her. My mother glared at him as if he had betrayed a long-established alliance. She pointed at my father. "Richard, say something." Dad swallowed hard. He looked between my mother, my brother, and me like he was choosing which side of a cliff to fall from. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Maybe we should talk about this." Derek laughed loudly. "Unbelievable." "You are taking her side now, Dad." I stared at all of them, seeing them clearly for the first time. The fake smiles, the polite facade, the illusions they wrapped around themselves to avoid accountability. Everything about the dinner was staged. The table settings, the turkey, the forced small talk. The family dynamic was so cold it almost chilled the room more than the air conditioner running in the hallway. "How long have you known?" I asked Dad. He blinked. "What?" He knew what I meant. "How long have you known about the trust fund?" His eyes fell. "A long time," he muttered. "A very long time." Something inside me snapped not loudly but quietly like a thread pulled too tight. Instead of exploding, the anger settled low and heavy in my chest. "Why did no one tell me?" I asked again. My mother huffed. "Because you were always emotional. You would not have handled it well. You do not handle anything well." I stared at her, at the woman who raised me, at the woman who lied to me, at the woman who had shaped every insecurity I carried into adulthood, and I realized she believed every word she said. She genuinely believed withholding money meant for me was an act of parental wisdom. Derek lifted his beer again. "This dinner sucks," he said. "Can I go?" Grandpa slammed his palm on the table loud enough to make all of us jump. "No one is leaving," he said firmly. "Not until the truth is spoken." My mother's face twisted. "This is humiliating." "No," she muttered. "This is unnecessary." But the truth was more necessary than anything we had ever done as a family. I looked at the turkey on the platter, the flickering candles, the polished silverware, all the effort my mother put into appearing perfect, and I wondered how many lies had been served at this table over the years, how many truths were carved away like unwanted pieces of fat, how many times we had pretended everything was fine while the foundation underneath us crumbled. And as I sat there watching my family unravel in slow motion, one thing became undeniable. This was not a dinner. This was the moment the curtain finally fell. Grandpa reached down beside his chair again, the same slow, deliberate movement that had already turned the entire night inside out once before. The metal lockbox scraped softly against the wood floor as he pulled it closer. My mother stiffened as if the box itself were dangerous. Derek leaned forward, squinting at it like there might be beer inside. My father sat utterly still, hands folded too neatly in his lap, the way guilty men sit when they are waiting for judgment. Grandpa placed the lockbox on the table and rested his hand on top of it. The gesture was calm, almost gentle, but the room reacted as if someone had drawn a weapon. No one breathed. Grandpa looked at me, not with pity, but with resolve. "Rachel, open it." My mother snapped upright. "Arthur, do not do this. It is not your place." Grandpa turned his head slowly toward her. "I think it is exactly my place, seeing as I am the trustee who set up the fund for my granddaughter." Derek blinked. "Trustee? What is that even supposed to mean?" Mom ignored him. She stepped closer to the table, reaching for the box. "You do not understand the complexity of this," she tried. "It is not as simple as you think." Grandpa's eyes did not move from hers. Denise stepped back. She hesitated long enough to reveal the truth before any letter did. Then she lowered her hand and took a shaky step away from the table. Grandpa slid the lockbox toward me. The cold metal brushed my fingertips. My heart thudded behind my ribs. The key sat already in the lock from when he had opened it earlier. I twisted it slowly. The click felt louder than it should have, ringing through the room like a small explosion. When I opened the lid, the scent of old paper rose up. Inside were 2 stacks wrapped in rubber bands. One stack was thin, the other was thick. Grandpa nodded toward the thicker one. "Start there." I lifted it out. The envelopes were aged slightly at the edges, their surfaces worn from years of shifting around inside the box. Each one had my name printed neatly on the front in the bank's serif font, Rachel Monroe. Underneath that printed line was the return address from the First National Bank of Missouri. My chest tightened. I held the stack in both hands. There had to be at least 10 envelopes, maybe 12. One for each year I had never known. I chose the envelope on top, dated the year I turned 18. My mother sucked in a breath. Derek eyed her suspiciously now, the alcohol no longer making him oblivious. I slid a finger beneath the flap, tearing it open slowly. A single sheet of paper slid out crisp and official. It was printed with my name at the top and the words, "Beneficiary Contact Update Confirmation," directly beneath it. Grandpa watched my face carefully. "That was the year you became legally an adult," he said. "The year the bank required that all future communication go directly to you." My mother stepped forward. "Banks make mistakes," she insisted. "They probably sent it wrong." But the lie came out brittle. Grandpa kept his gaze on me. "Read the second line." My eyes dropped to the small text. "Contact update requested by Guardian. New address confirmed." There was an email address listed. Not mine. I knew immediately whose it was. It was written exactly the way my mother always labeled her household accounts. I opened the next envelope. Annual trust adjustment. I opened another. Beneficiary statement enclosed. Each one carried the same pattern updates meant for me never delivered, always rerouted. My throat tightened as I flipped through the stack letter after letter documenting a life I was supposed to have access to but never did. Each envelope was proof of a decision someone made without my knowledge. A decision that shaped years of my life. Years of struggle. Years of believing I was the problem. I opened another envelope, this one dated when I was 21. The letter congratulated me on the trust reaching a new threshold. It stated the fund would have assisted with education costs or early housing support. My hands shook harder. I remembered that year vividly. I had worked double shifts and skipped meals to afford tuition. I had called my mother crying one night after a 12-hour shift asking if they could help even a little. She had sighed and said, "Rachel, we are barely staying afloat." I had believed her. Now I knew the truth. I lifted my head slowly. "Mom, why did you hide these from me?" She put a hand to her chest as if wounded. "I did not hide them. I managed the household paperwork. I must have forgotten to forward them. For 12 years I asked." Her voice rose. "I did what I had to do. You were always too emotional to handle money responsibly. You would have wasted it." I stared at her blankly. Nor did she flinch. Derek squinted at her. "You said we had no money," he muttered. "You said Rachel was lucky just to pay her bills." My mother snapped. "Derek, stay out of this." Grandpa cleared his throat. He reached across the table and took the envelopes from my shaking hands. Then he began sorting them into chronological order, spreading them across the table like evidence. "The bank sent these every year," he said. "Same time, same instructions, same address provided by your mother." Denise went pale. "You are twisting things," she hissed. "You do not know how complicated finances are." Grandpa ignored her. He handed me one more envelope, the oldest in the stack. "This is the first one the year the trust was finalized." I opened it. Inside was a letter printed in bold. "Dear Miss Monroe, we are pleased to inform you that your trust has been activated. Distributions will begin upon reaching specified milestones. You are the sole beneficiary." My vision blurred again. Not with tears this time, with clarity. The truth settled into me like a stone dropped into a lake. Heavy, deep, permanent. My mother had kept money meant for me. My future. My independence. My stability. She had taken those things and locked them away without a second thought. Derek stared at the spread of letters. His face twisted with something between confusion and dawning realization. Dad looked ashamed in the quiet way only men who have let their families down without ever breaking a rule can look. Silence pressed in around us like fog. The letters lay across the table, undeniable, unarguable, unspinnable. And in that moment, the world I grew up in finally cracked open. The letters on the table blurred as a wave of memories rose and crashed over me. Memories I had spent years packing into boxes at the back of my mind because looking at them too closely felt like touching a bruise that never healed. The trust fund explained the financial lies, but the lies were only one part of the story. The rest lived inside my skin in the places where old pain settled like sediment. As I stared at the envelopes, another memory uncurled itself without warning, sharp as broken glass. I was 17. It was late January, and the house was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones because you lived in a family that forgot to turn up the heat unless guests were coming. Derek had been in one of his moods that evening, slamming doors, yelling at the television, picking fights with shadows. He said he was bored. He said he needed space. He said anything that allowed him to justify his anger. I had been walking down the hallway toward the kitchen when I felt his hand on my shoulder. Before I could react, he shoved me hard. My body flew sideways, colliding with the edge of the cabinet with a crack that echoed in my ears. A burst of white shot across my vision. The pain was instant and electric. I slid down to the floor, clutching my shoulder, gasping. Derek stood over me, his expression a mix of annoyance and pride, as if he had solved a problem rather than created one. Mom appeared seconds later, drawn by the sound. She took in the scene quickly, her eyes trailing from my tear-streaked face to Derek's defiant posture. For one suspended moment, I thought she would finally say something, finally call out his behavior, finally choose me. Instead, she inhaled sharply and said, "Rachel, stop crying. You know how dramatic you get." I stared at her, disbelieving. "I think my shoulder is broken," I whispered. She clicked her tongue, irritated. "You probably twisted it a little. Get up, you will be fine." But I could not get up. I could barely breathe. When she realized I could not stand, she sighed again and told Dad to get the car. 10 minutes later, we arrived at the emergency room. The fluorescent lights buzzed. I felt dizzy and nauseous from the pain. A nurse gently examined my shoulder and asked me what happened. I opened my mouth, the truth trembling on my tongue. But before I could speak, my mother stepped between us. "She fell," she said. "Slipped down the stairs. Happens all the time." The nurse looked from her to me, eyes narrowing slightly as if she recognized the practiced tone. She tried again later when Mom stepped out to use the restroom. The nurse lowered her voice and asked, "Did someone push you, honey? You can tell me. We are mandatory reporters. It is safe here." But the moment she finished her sentence, my mother appeared beside me again, as if pulled by a string, cutting off any possibility of honesty. I felt myself fold inward, the truth collapsing. "No," I said meekly. "I fell. Just an accident." My mother nodded proudly as if I had passed some twisted test. The X-rays confirmed a fractured clavicle. The doctor explained the treatment plan, then asked if I felt safe going home. Mom answered for me. "Of course she is safe. She just needs to be more careful." Derek never apologized. Not that night. Not ever. At school, I wore a sling for weeks. People asked what happened, and I repeated the story so often that I almost believed it myself. I fell. It was nothing, just clumsy. A habit formed that year. A habit of shrinking around Derek's moods, anticipating danger before it arrived, keeping my voice soft enough to avoid provoking anyone. I learned how to step around him like he was a piece of unstable furniture. I learned how to read my mother's expression for signs of oncoming storms. I learned how to disappear. There were other moments, too. Smaller on the surface, but each one carved another inch out of me. The time Derek threw a hairbrush at my face because I was blocking the hallway. The time he grabbed my wrist so hard I cried out only for Mom to scold me for exaggerating. The time Dad shrugged helplessly and said, "You know how he is." What he meant was, "You know we are not going to protect you." I remembered being 15 when Derek broke my favorite ceramic mug, the one Grandpa gave me with tiny sunflowers painted on it. I had spent an hour gluing the pieces back together with trembling fingers. When I showed my mother the repaired mug, she laughed. "It is just a cup." "Rachel," she said, "why do you get so emotional over everything?" The truth was, I was not emotional. I was alone. My family mistook loneliness for weakness because they could not tell the difference. Sitting at that dinner table now with the trust fund letters spread across the tablecloth like puzzle pieces, I realized those early years had taught me to expect nothing from the people who claimed to love me. They taught me to carry pain silently. They taught me to survive without support, affection, or fairness. And they taught me that telling the truth only made things worse. So when adulthood came and money became tight and life became heavy, I never questioned why I had to struggle. I never once wondered if anything had been taken from me. I assumed the fault was mine. That memory of the broken shoulder was only the beginning. There were countless others. Nights I lay awake listening to Derek scream at video games while Mom defended him. Days when my father acted like a visitor in his own home, hiding behind silence while my mother dictated every decision. Years of being told I was too dramatic, too emotional, too difficult. And now here I was, 31 years old, sitting in front of a stack of letters that proved my suffering was not a natural consequence of life, but a carefully constructed lie. Grandpa reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His touch was steady grounding. He had always been the one person in my life who saw through the silence, who recognized the fear I tried to hide, who understood that being quiet was not the same thing as being fine. "You deserved better," he said softly. And in that moment, I finally believed him. Grandpa removed his hand from mine and reached for the second stack of papers inside the lockbox, the thinner stack that looked newer, sharper, more dangerous. If the envelopes were the history of what had been hidden, these were the receipts of what had been done. He placed the stack in front of me without saying a word. My mother's breath caught. Derek blinked slowly, still trying to piece together the shape of the evening. Dad remained motionless, staring at the tablecloth as though it might swallow him whole. Grandpa nodded toward the laptop resting near the end of the table. "Open it," he said calmly. I did. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the room with cold light. He tapped the touchpad with surprising steadiness for his age and navigated to the bank's online portal. "Rachel, this account is yours," he said. "It always has been." He typed in his trustee credentials. My mother flinched at the sight of the login screen, as if it were a confession booth with no door to hide behind. The dashboard loaded and the account balance appeared in bold numbers at the top. I sucked in a breath. $126,412. My throat tightened. The last time I checked my own bank account, I had $63 until payday. Derek let out a low whistle. "That is a lot of money." Mom snapped her fingers at him. "Do not comment on things you do not understand." Grandpa ignored both of them. He clicked into the message center where notifications from the bank were stored. A long list dropped down. Each message was stamped with a date. Each one was marked unread. "These should have gone straight to you," he said. "Every year, every quarter, every update." I scanned the list. Annual trust report, asset allocation summary, contact information reminder, contribution adjustment. There were dozens, maybe more. And then Grandpa clicked into the document that shattered any remaining doubt. A scanned form filled the screen. A signed form. The title at the top, "Request of Trustee Contact Change." My heart pounded. The signature line at the bottom was unmistakable. "Denise Monroe." My mother lunged toward the laptop. "That is not what it looks like." Grandpa lifted a hand to stop her. "It looks like you changed the contact information for Rachel's trust without her consent." She swallowed hard, her jaw clenched. "I told you it was complicated. These things are never simple." "It is very simple," Grandpa said. "You signed a form authorizing all trust communications to be routed to an email that does not belong to Rachel. An email I recognized instantly on the document. The same style she used for all the household bills she micromanaged. The same pattern she used to control everything. Denise. Household. Finance. At a provider she kept secret by calling it the family account. My vision tunneled for a moment as the truth struck me again. When I was 22 and working 3 jobs, the trust fund grew. When I cried in the break room because I could not afford new scrubs, the trust fund grew. When I was 25 and considering dropping out of nursing school because the loans were too heavy, the trust fund grew. And every time I asked my mother if we had any savings for emergencies, she said the same thing. "We are barely keeping the lights on." I believed her, because children raised in fear believe the people who hurt them. Grandpa clicked another tab. A PDF opened. The first page contained a detailed summary of the trust's growth over the years. Starting balance $42,000, yearly contributions, modest market expansions. It had all been there, for me, for a decade. Derek leaned his elbows on the table. "Why does she get all that money?" he asked, frowning at the document. "She moved out. She barely comes home." Grandpa shot him a sharp look. "Because the trust was not a reward for obedience, Derek. It was created when she was born, for her future, for her independence, for her safety." Derek scoffed. "For her safety," Mom shook her head violently. "You are making this sound malicious. I did what needed to be done. Rachel would have wasted this money. She has always been too emotional to make big decisions." I stared at her. I could feel something inside me shifting, something that had been trapped beneath years of silence, finally trying to break free. Too emotional. The phrase she used to dismiss every fear, every plea, every wound. Grandpa closed the PDF and clicked on a time-stamped log. "This document lists every time the bank attempted to verify contact information," he said. There were at least 15 entries. All of them listed confirmation from the email my mother controlled. Derek looked between Mom and the screen. "Did you know about this?" Mom demanded. Dad's face twisted. His voice was small. "I knew some of it." Derek gaped. "Some of it? You both lied to her." Mom pointed at me. "She is ungrateful. She never appreciated what we did for her." I laughed quietly. It was not a happy sound. It was brittle and exhausted. "What did you do for me, Mom?" I asked. "What exactly?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. "I fed you. I clothed you. I kept this family together." Derek slammed his hand on the table. "You told me she was broke. You made me drive her car because she could not afford gas. You said she needed to learn responsibility." Mom snapped. "I did not want jealousy in this house." Derek's voice rose. "Jealousy? You made her starve while you hid money with her name on it." Grandpa leaned back in his chair, his face stern, his voice steady. "This is financial abuse, Denise." My mother's head shot toward him. "How dare you!" Grandpa clicked open one final document. This one contained a breakdown of the current assets and projected growth. Not only had the trust grown, it had grown because she had refused to let me use any of it. "These funds could have paid your tuition," he said gently to me. "They could have paid for safer housing, reliable transportation, even a down payment on a small home." I swallowed hard. The years I spent crying in hospital bathrooms flashed through my mind. The hours of overtime, the months I skipped dentist appointments because I could not afford them, the birthdays I spent alone because work paid time and a half, the exhaustion, the fear, the debt. When I spoke, my voice was barely audible. "Why, Mom, did you do this?" The tears streaming down her cheeks made her look fragile, but I knew better. Fragility was her favorite disguise. She whispered, "Because you would have left us. You would have become too independent. You would not have needed me." That sentence hit me harder than any shove Derek had ever delivered. She hid my future because she was afraid I would outgrow her. Grandpa exhaled, a sound full of sorrow and disappointment. "This ends tonight," he said. The moment Grandpa said "this ends tonight," something in the room snapped, not loudly, not visibly at first, but like a fault line giving way under pressure that had been building for decades. Derek's face twisted, the muscles around his jaw tightening until it looked like he was grinding his teeth. His beer can tilted in his hand, foam sliding down the side, unnoticed. He stared at the laptop screen again, then at the spread of letters, then at Mom, as if trying to measure which version of reality he was supposed to believe, now that the lies were no longer lining up neatly. "You told me we were broke," he said, voice rising. "You said Rachel barely paid rent. You said she begged for help because she made bad choices." Mom's expression twisted with panic. "Derek, honey, listen to me. I did what I had to do." "No." He pushed himself up from his chair so fast the legs screeched against the floor. "No, no, that is not what you said." His finger jabbed in my direction. "You made her sound pathetic. You made her sound like a failure. You made me feel like I was better than her. You told me I deserved things more because she was irresponsible." Grandpa's eyes followed Derek carefully. "Sit down, son." Derek ignored him. He took a step toward the table toward me. "You let me believe she was the reason this family struggled. But all along she had money. Money with her name on it. Money you hid." He slammed his hand on the table so hard the plates rattled cranberry sauce sloshing over the rim. Then he snapped. "You hid her money, but you bought me a truck." Derek's voice cracked with something raw. Anger, yes, but something else too. Entitlement mixed with betrayal. A dangerous combination. My mother stepped between him and the table, hands lifted. "Derek, please calm down. You do not understand." He towered over her, breathing hard. "Understand what?" "That you lied, that you manipulated all of us." Grandpa stood leaning heavily on his cane. "Derek, enough!" But Derek was too far gone. Years of coddling had created a man who had no tools for discomfort, no tolerance for shame, and no ability to take responsibility for anything. And now shame was all he felt. His hand shot out suddenly. He grabbed my arm just above the elbow and squeezed. Hard. The pain was immediate, sharp, radiating up to my shoulder. The kind of pain I had felt too many times growing up. "You owe us," he growled. "You owe this family. All those years you acted like you were better than us when you were sitting on a pile of money." "Let go of me," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was thundering. Mom stepped forward. "Derek, stop." Dad finally pushed back his chair, but his movements were slow, hesitant, like he still was not sure whose side he was supposed to be on. Grandpa stepped forward with surprising speed and slammed the end of his cane between Derek and me. "Let her go!" he barked. Derek stumbled back a step. His chest rose and fell rapidly. His eyes were glossy with emotion he was too unstable to contain. "You all lied to me!" he shouted, pointing wildly at Mom and Dad. Mom winced. "Derek, listen to me." "No," he roared. "You said she was weak. You said she needed guidance. You said she could not handle her own life." He turned to me again, eyes narrowing. "You played the victim so well." I felt something cold settle inside me, then far colder than fear, a clarity carved from years of being dismissed. I looked at him directly and said, "Derek, I never played anything. You just never looked at me long enough to see the truth." The words landed like a slap. Derek's face contorted. He lunged forward again, grabbing my wrist this time and jerking me toward him with enough force that my chair tipped. The pain shot through my arm. Grandpa shouted, "Derek, let her go this instant." But Derek did not listen. His grip tightened. His breath smelled like beer and resentment. "You owe me," he snarled. "You owe all of us for everything we did for you, for taking care of you." My laugh came out sharp and humorless. "You never took care of me." His grip tightened. "I said shut up." Grandpa took a step forward, and for a moment I worried he might fall, but he braced himself and lifted his cane. "Touch her again and you are out of this house." This time Derek hesitated. His eyes shifted wildly between Grandpa, the cane, the letters, Mom's panicked face. His grip loosened slightly, but only slightly. My mother lunged forward, then grabbing Derek's arm. "Derek, stop this. Stop right now." For the first time all night, she sounded genuinely afraid. Not for me, for him. For her precious son losing control in front of the one person she could not manipulate. Derek shook her off hard enough that she stumbled backward. "This is your fault," he shouted at her. "You should have told us. You should have told me." Grandpa's face darkened. He stepped forward again, his voice steady as bedrock. "Derek, sit down." Derek looked at him, chest-heaving eyes still burning. And then something broke. His posture sagged. His gaze dropped. He released me abruptly and stumbled backward until he hit his chair. He collapsed into it, rubbing his hands over his face. I cradled my wrist, the skin already reddening. Mom stepped toward me instinctively, but Grandpa blocked her path. "You stay where you are, Denise." She froze, breathing fast. Dad stood near the wall, hands trembling. Derek muttered under his breath, "She does not deserve it. She does not deserve any of this money." Grandpa turned to him slowly. "Derek, you do not decide what your sister deserves. You do not decide her future. And you will not put your hands on her again." Derek scoffed but did not stand. The room pulsed with the aftershocks of his outburst, the fear, the shame, the unraveling. My wrist throbbed, but the quiet forming inside me was stronger than the pain. The silence that followed felt like the first true silence of the night. Heavy, acknowledging, honest. And for the first time, I realized Derek was not the only person losing control. The entire system my mother had built was collapsing piece by piece, and I was finally seeing it without distortion. Derek's meltdown left the room vibrating with a strange, unstable silence, the kind that settles right before something irreversible happens. My mother hovered behind him, wringing her hands, her eyes darting between me, Grandpa, and the laptop screen, as if searching for a version of reality she could still control. Dad remained planted near the wall, shoulders hunched, gaze on the floor. A man so used to disappearing that he had forgotten how to exist. Grandpa lowered himself back into his chair with the weight of someone who had been holding the family up for far too long. Then he reached to the side of the table and pulled out a manila folder I had not noticed earlier. It was thick, very thick. And the moment he placed it on the table in front of me, my mother made a sound like she had been punched in the chest. "Arthur, please." "Not that." He looked at her calmly. "Exactly that." Derek lifted his head, confusion tightening his expression again. "What now?" "More lies, Mom." My mother shot him a warning look, but he ignored her entirely. Grandpa slid the folder toward me. Rachel opened it. My fingers shook as I lifted the flap. Inside lay a stack of printed documents, each clipped together neatly. The first page on top bore a title that made my heart drop: Trustee Change Request and Verification. The same title as the scanned form on the laptop, but this one was an original printout. Beneath it was a photocopy of the document signed by my mother. Her signature, crisp and unmistakable, dated the exact month I had begged my parents for help paying for my nursing textbooks. My throat tightened. Grandpa tapped the page. That copy came from a certified request the bank mailed directly to me as the trustee. Every change of contact email or phone number requires verification from the guardian and the trustee. Your mother signed her part. The bank notified me as required, but she told me you were aware. She said you wanted me to handle communications on your behalf. My mother's voice trembled. "I did not think you would interfere." Her hands fluttered wildly. "I thought I could manage it myself." Grandpa ignored her and pulled out another document. This one was a printed record of every electronic confirmation the bank had sent to her email. Over a dozen entries, all verified, all acknowledged, none forwarded to me. Derek frowned. Wait, she actually told the bank she was acting for Rachel. Grandpa answered, "Yes, without Rachel's knowledge." Derek shook his head slowly as if reality were hitting him late and hard. "You said she agreed, Mom. You said she trusted you to manage it." He turned toward her, his tone incredulous. "You lied to me. To all of us." My mother's voice rose desperate. "I was protecting this family. I protected you. I protected her from ruining her life." Derek barked out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, you protected us all right." Grandpa laid 2 more pages in front of me. These showed the trust account's annual allocations in the years I had been drowning financially. Tuition assistance available, unused. Housing support available, unused. Emergency fund available, unused. Projected annual increase, unused, unused, unused. Each line was a blade, a quiet, devastating proof that everything I had struggled through had been unnecessary. Years of exhaustion, years of overtime shifts, years of panic every time my car made a strange noise, years of feeling like I was failing at adulthood, all because someone I trusted had made sure I stayed small. Grandpa opened another part of the folder. Inside were copies of 3 envelopes he had received from the bank over the years, each stamped with a large red warning, beneficiary non-response. Each letter stated that attempts to reach the beneficiary had gone unanswered. Each one listed the same email contact, the same wrong email, the same lie. Derek swore under his breath. "So you knew," he accused Mom. "You knew she was supposed to answer these letters. You knew she was supposed to fix her information." Mom snapped back. "I handled what needed to be handled. She was too emotional to handle money, too irresponsible to make financial decisions, too naive to understand the value of saving rather than spending it all." Grandpa's voice cut through her rant like a blade. She never spent a dime because she was never given a chance to see a dime. His tone sharpened. "And you counted on that." My mother looked at him with pure indignation. She glared at me. "You have always been dramatic, Rachel. You exaggerate everything. You always want to make us look like villains." I stared at her, stunned at the audacity. Dramatic, that word again. The word she used every time she needed to invalidate me. Grandpa reached for one final document, a printout of a confirmation email dated 2 years ago. The subject line: Verification of email address for beneficiary Rachel Monroe. Underlined beneath the line was a note. Confirmed by Guardian. I felt the room tilt for a moment. My mother shot forward and slapped her hand onto the document. That means nothing. It is just paperwork. Stop overreacting. Grandpa's voice boomed louder than I had ever heard it. Enough. His cane struck the floor with a thud that silenced the room. He looked at my mother with pure disappointment. You did not mismanage. You did not forget. You did not confuse documentation. You made a deliberate decision to restrict your daughter's access to her own future. My mother's face drained of color. Derek stared at her now with growing disgust. You told me she was helpless. You told me she needed guidance. Mom's breath hitched. I did it for this family. Derek pointed at the documents. No, you did it to control her. Grandpa leaned slightly toward me. His voice softened again. These papers prove everything. Not emotionally, not subjectively, legally. My chest tightened. Legally. The truth was not only emotionally devastating, it was concrete, documented, proven, and for a moment I could not breathe. Not because I was afraid, because for the first time in my life, the truth was finally in the open, finally undeniable, finally mine. The room felt smaller as the weight of everything settled into the walls, like the house itself was realizing its foundations had been built on lies. The air thickened, pressing in from all sides. My mother stood frozen, her hand still gripping the edge of the damning document, as if she could will the ink to rearrange itself. Derek stared at her with a twisted mixture of betrayal and rage, a look I had never seen on his face before. Dad stood uselessly near the doorway, shoulders sagging further with every passing second, shrinking into the background where he had always existed. Grandpa straightened in his chair, his age visible, but his authority unshakable. This has gone on long enough, he said. His voice carried a finality that made the room fall into a deeper silence. My mother broke first. She threw her hands up and let out a sharp breath. Fine, she snapped. You want the truth? Fine. She jabbed a finger toward the envelopes scattered across the table. I did what I had to do. Your father could not handle money. Derek would have spent every cent on trucks and alcohol. And you, she said, turning toward me with a sneer curling at the edges of her mouth. You were always too emotional to make good decisions. Always fragile. Always difficult. It was only a matter of time before you made some terrible mistake. Her words sliced through the air with practiced cruelty. Derek's head snapped toward her. Wait, he said slowly. So you did keep it from her. You did all of this on purpose. My mother's expression wavered. Her confidence cracked. I did it for the family. For stability. You do not understand the burden I carry. Derek laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. Stability. You lied to us. You lied to me. You made me think she was the problem. Mom stepped forward, her voice breaking. You cannot talk to me like that. I am your mother. Derek barked. So what? And then he kicked the leg of the table so hard the silverware jumped. A plate slid off the edge and shattered on the floor. My mother screamed his name. Derek! What is wrong with you? Dad finally moved, but it was too late. Derek shoved his chair backward violently. It clattered to the floor. He stormed toward the kitchen counter and grabbed another beer, hands shaking. You ruined everything, he snarled, pointing the can at our mother like an accusation. You told me Rachel got what she deserved. You told me we struggled because of her mistakes, and the whole time she had money. Money you hid to teach her a lesson. My mother's eyes rimmed with tears. I did it because I had to. She was going to leave us. She would have abandoned this family. Derek blinked. He looked at me. You were going to leave. He sounded almost childlike. I swallowed hard. Derek, I wanted a life, a future, something more than what this house taught me. My mother spun toward me. You see, she shouted, that is what I protected you from. That attitude, that ungratefulness. You think you deserve everything without giving anything back. I stared at her. I had given everything. My childhood. My effort. My silence. My mother's voice rose again. You always thought you were better than us, that you were some victim. I stepped back, stunned. I never thought that. I just wanted fairness. Her laugh was sharp. Fairness does not exist. You think the world owes you something because you worked a job and went to school. I opened my mouth, but Derek beat me to it. Mom, stop, he said, pointing a trembling finger at her. Just stop. You lied. You manipulated. You kept money from Rachel that could have helped her. You told me she was weak. But you are the one who made her weak. Dad stepped forward, then his voice cracking. Denise, he whispered. Enough. My mother spun on him. Not you, too. You will not turn on me. You know everything I did was for this family. Dad looked at me, sorrow etched deep on his face. I knew, he whispered. I knew she was hiding things. I knew you were hurting. I should have said something. I should have protected you. The admission hit me harder than I expected. All those years of silence were not ignorance. They were complicity. I felt a tremor rise in my chest. Why did you not? I asked. He dropped his gaze. I was afraid. Derek slammed his beer onto the counter. This family is insane, he muttered. Completely insane. And then he grabbed the edge of a cabinet door and yanked it open so hard it cracked. My mother shrieked, Derek, stop it! Stop right now! But Derek was unraveling. He shoved dishes out of the cabinet. Plates hit the floor. Bowls bounced and shattered. Mom lunged to stop him, but he pushed her back so hard she fell against the refrigerator. Dad stumbled helplessly toward her. Derek kept muttering under his breath. Years of resentment, privilege, and denial pouring out of him like gasoline onto a fire. Grandpa slammed his cane against the ground. Derek, that is enough. Derek spun toward me suddenly. His eyes were wild. And you, he said, you ruined everything. If you had just stayed where you belonged, none of this would have happened. My heart pounded. I belonged nowhere in this house, I said quietly. That was the problem. Derek stepped toward me, but Grandpa blocked his path with his cane. You lay one more hand on her, and you are out of this house and out of my will. The room froze. Derek stared at him. You would cut me off. Grandpa nodded once, without hesitation. Derek's mouth opened and closed like he could not reconcile the threat with the reality. Something inside him crumpled. He stumbled backward onto a chair and buried his face in his hands. My mother rushed to him, trying to touch his shoulder, but he jerked away. Do not touch me. You destroyed everything. The house was coming apart in slow motion. Mom sobbing, Dad shaking, Derek spiraling, and me standing in the middle of it, seeing clearly for the first time. The system that oppressed me was collapsing, and it was doing so under the weight of its own lies. Grandpa looked at me with steady eyes. Rachel, you do not have to stay in this house another minute. You do not owe them anything. He turned to the others. But you, Denise, owe her the truth. And tonight, she finally has it. For a long moment, no one moved. The house felt like a collapsed stage set. Props, scattered actors, stunned, the script burned to ash. My mother's sobs slowed into sharp breaths. Derek sat slumped at the table with his face hidden in his hands. Dad leaned against the wall as if he needed it to stay upright. Grandpa was the only one still steady, still anchored, still capable of holding the room in place. Then he reached for his phone. Rachel, he said, his voice low but unwavering. I am calling Paul. My mother's head snapped up. Arthur, no. Grandpa ignored her and dialed. The ringing filled the room like a countdown. When the voice on the other end answered, Grandpa softened his tone. Paul, it is Arthur. I need you. Yes. Tonight. No, it cannot wait. Yes, it is regarding the Monroe Trust. My mother pressed her palms together. Arthur, please do not bring an outsider into this. It is humiliating. Grandpa hung up the call and looked at her with a firmness that made her flinch. Denise, you brought humiliation on yourself. Paul will be here in 20 minutes. Derek scoffed into his hands. Great, a financial advisor. As if this night cannot get worse. Grandpa turned to me. Rachel, gather the letters. We are taking them into the study. I hesitated, glancing at my mother, who looked like she might collapse, but something inside me had finally shifted. The quiet I used to wrap around myself had become something sharper, steadier, something like truth. I gathered the envelopes and the documents, stacking them carefully. Grandpa placed a hand on my shoulder. "You will not face this alone," he said. "Not anymore." We moved toward the study, the warm lamplight spilling across the doorway. The walls were lined with framed photographs and shelves filled with books. It had always been the safest room in the house. Tonight, it felt like a courtroom. Grandpa gestured for me to sit in the leather chair behind his desk. He stood beside me, one hand resting on the back of the chair, the other gripping his cane. A few minutes later, footsteps approached. Paul Granger stepped inside, still wearing his blazer from his own dinner. He was in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair and the calm confidence of a man who had handled thousands of complicated family finances. He greeted Grandpa warmly and then turned to me with gentle respect. "Rachel." "I am glad you called me," I said. "Grandpa did." Paul nodded. "Good, because what we need to do tonight is simple. Restore control of what is already yours." My mother appeared in the doorway, red-eyed, trembling. "Arthur, this is unnecessary. We can fix this privately." Grandpa's voice was cold. "You had 12 years to fix this privately." Paul opened his briefcase and pulled out a set of documents. "Form 482, Beneficiary Contact Restoration," he said, "and the trustee authorization to remove all unauthorized contacts from the system." He placed the papers in front of me. "You sign here, here, and here. Grandpa signs here as trustee." I stared at the lines where my name belonged. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From something that felt new. Something like strength. My mother stepped forward suddenly. "You cannot let her do this. She is emotional. She is not thinking clearly." Paul turned to her with professional composure. "Mrs. Monroe, with respect, your daughter has full legal authority over her own trust." "You do not." She sputtered. "This is still my family." Paul's tone remained calm. "And this is still her money." Derek lurched into the room, then still disheveled face blotchy from the meltdown. "If she gets that money," he said, voice hoarse, "she will leave again." Grandpa met his gaze evenly. "That is her choice, not yours." Derek glared at me. "We are supposed to be a family." Something in me snapped, a quiet, steady snap. "No," I said. "We were supposed to be a family. What we were was a hierarchy." Derek blinked at me as if seeing me for the first time, and then I picked up the pen. My mother gasped. "Rachel, do not do this. Do not abandon us. Do not break this family." I signed my name. The moment the pen hit the paper, the house itself seemed to exhale. Grandpa signed next. Paul gathered the documents swiftly and placed them in his briefcase. "I will file these tonight," he said. "By morning, Rachel will have full and exclusive access to every part of her trust." He turned to me. "You will receive an email with your new login. No more third-party contact." My mother shook her head, devastated. "Rachel, please. You cannot understand what this means. You are taking everything from us." I looked at her. For the first time, I did not lower my gaze. "You took everything from me first." Paul closed his briefcase. "I will see myself out." He shook Grandpa's hand, nodded respectfully to me, and left. Silence fell again, thick, heavy, real. Grandpa placed both hands on his cane, leaning slightly as he looked at my parents. "Denise, Richard, this ends tonight. No more secrets. No more control. No more lies." My mother sank into the nearest chair, covering her face. Dad hovered behind her, uncertain, ashamed, unable to undo decades of silence. Derek slumped against the doorframe, eyes dull and unfocused. And then Grandpa turned to me. "Rachel, you do not have to stay here. You never have to stay here again." The words hit me like cool air after years of suffocation. I stood slowly. My legs felt shaky, but they held. I looked around the room, at the shelves, at the photos, at the documents that had reshaped my entire life in one night. And then I walked back toward the living room where the cold remains of the dinner still sat on the table. My mother looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "You are leaving," she whispered. Her voice wavered between disbelief and desperation. I nodded. "Yes." Derek scrambled to his feet. "You cannot leave. Not like this. Not when everything is falling apart." My voice was calm. "Everything fell apart long before tonight. You just never noticed." My mother reached out a trembling hand. "Rachel, please. We can fix this. We can move forward." I paused at the doorway. I do not want to move forward with people who spent years holding me back. And then I stepped outside into the cool night air. For the first time, the darkness felt like freedom instead of fear. I moved into my new apartment 3 days later. It was a modest one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a brick building near downtown Kansas City, small enough that my footsteps echoed slightly on the laminate floor, but bright enough that the morning sun washed every inch of it in clean gold. When I first unlocked the door and stepped inside, carrying nothing but a duffel bag, a thrift store lamp, and the old lockbox Grandpa gave me, I felt something strangely unfamiliar settle into my chest. Silence, but not the suffocating silence of my childhood home. This was a quiet that belonged to me. I placed the lockbox on the kitchen counter. It felt lighter than ever empty, but symbolic, a reminder that the weight of other people's control had finally been lifted. For the first 2 nights, I slept on an air mattress, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the gentle hum of the city outside. It was the first time in my life that loneliness did not feel like punishment. It felt like peace. The morning after moving in, I received an email from the bank. Subject line: Beneficiary access restored. When I clicked into the portal, my name filled every field. My email, my address, my contact information. No hidden aliases, no altered details, no shadow ownership. I stared at it for a long time, not because I doubted it, but because accepting it felt like learning to breathe differently. Grandpa called later that afternoon. His voice was soft but proud. "How does freedom feel?" he asked. Like standing on my own legs for the first time, I answered. He chuckled. "Those legs were yours all along. Someone just convinced you to kneel." I visited him the next day. He had a cup of chamomile tea waiting for me and a folder neatly set on the table. Inside was a financial plan Paul had prepared outlining safe investments, emergency funds, and long-term growth strategies. "I want you to build something that lasts," Grandpa said. "Not because you owe anyone, because you deserve it." I nodded, swallowing the sudden tightness in my throat. I had always associated money with shame or conflict. Now it felt like possibility. A week later, I started therapy. My therapist was a 60-year-old woman named Margaret with silver curls and a voice that reminded me of warm blankets. She listened without interrupting as I unfolded years of being minimized, dismissed, and gaslighted. When I told her about the night in the emergency room when I broke my collarbone, she closed her notebook slowly. "Rachel," she said, "what happened to you was not normal. It was abuse." Something inside me loosened at that word. Abuse. The thing I had spent so long avoiding naming. The thing that finally made sense of the years I had tried to rationalize. Margaret helped me understand patterns the way survivors learn to shrink themselves to anticipate danger, to carry guilt for things they did not cause. Each session felt like sweeping dust out of corners I had never examined. Meanwhile, life outside therapy unfolded quietly but steadily. I bought my first real bed. I learned the bus routes. I tried a new coffee shop every weekend. I took long walks after my shifts at the hospital, letting the cool Missouri wind clear my mind. 2 weeks after I moved out, I received a text from Dad. It said, simply, "I am sorry." I stared at those 3 words for almost 5 minutes. Not because they moved me, but because they were 20 years too late. I replied with, "Thank you and nothing else." I was learning that closure did not always come wrapped in forgiveness. Sometimes it came from accepting what would never be repaired. Derek did not reach out, but I heard from a coworker of his that he got picked up for a DUI after leaving a bar near Independence Avenue. When I read the text, I felt no satisfaction and no sorrow, just distance, like someone mentioning a storm in a state I no longer lived in. My mother tried to call me once. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. when she texted, "I miss you," Rachel, followed by, "You broke this family." I turned the phone off and placed it face down on the table. In therapy, Margaret told me that estrangement is not cruelty. It is self-preservation, and for the first time, I believed her. I kept in close contact with Grandpa, though. Every Sunday, I visited him for dinner. We cooked simple meals together, pasta, roasted chicken, whatever was easy. He asked about my work, my health, my apartment, not because he needed updates, but because he cared. One evening, he handed me the empty lockbox. "You should keep this," he said. I smiled. "Why? It holds nothing." Grandpa tapped the lid. "That is why. It is no longer a burden. It is a reminder. You decide what fills your life now." The next month, I attended a financial literacy workshop Paul recommended. Sitting in that bright conference room with other adults trying to untangle their futures felt strangely empowering. When the instructor asked us to write our goals on an index card, my hand hovered for a moment before writing, "Build a life I am not afraid of." I tucked the card into my wallet. At work, I began to stand up for myself more. I stopped picking up every overtime shift out of fear of disappointing someone. I took breaks. I ate lunch. I stopped apologizing every time I needed something. One night, after a 12-hour shift, a younger nurse asked me how I stay so calm when family drama gets loud. I smiled, by learning what I am no longer willing to carry. That same week, I bought a small potted plant for my apartment, a fiddle-leaf fig. It sat by the window, catching the sun each morning. It felt symbolic, like something finally growing inside me that had been starved for too long. As weeks passed, the heaviness that once clung to my ribs began to lift. Not all at once, but slowly, the way winter melts into spring. I still had moments when I felt guilt tug at the edges of my mind. But Margaret taught me to ask one question each time. Does this guilt come from love or conditioning? Every time, the answer was the same. Conditioning. One afternoon, while sitting on my balcony watching the city hum below me, I realized something that made my breath catch. I was not waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was not flinching at sudden noises. I was not bracing for insults disguised as parenting. I was simply existing, living, and it felt like the rarest luxury. A month after I moved in, Grandpa invited me to Sunday dinner again. But this time, when I walked into his home, something shifted. His eyes softened in a way that felt like relief. "You look well," he said. I smiled. "I feel well." We ate quietly, comfortably, like two people choosing each other rather than tolerating out of obligation. At the end of the night, he hugged me, his voice warm in my hair. "I am proud of you. You broke the cycle." Driving home, windows down, warm air brushing my face, I felt it settle in me fully. I had a life that belonged to me, a life shaped not by the people who tried to control me, but by the choices I finally had the freedom to make. And maybe that was the real inheritance. Not the trust fund, not the money, but the chance to build a future untouched by their fears. A future written in my own handwriting. A future I no longer had to apologize for. This life was mine. Finally. If this story stirred something deep in you, then I want to hear from you, because stories like mine do not happen in isolation. They happen in quiet houses behind closed curtains, where people are taught to smile for the world while surviving emotional storms no one else sees. If you grew up with a parent who controlled every decision, or a sibling who could do no wrong, or a family who punished you for wanting a life of your own, then your voice matters here more than you know. Tell me if you ever had to walk away from someone you loved because staying meant losing yourself. Tell me if you were ever blamed for the chaos someone else created. Tell me if you finally found peace at an age you never expected. Your story could help someone realize they are not alone. If you have ever faced financial manipulation, guilt-tripping favoritism, quiet cruelty, or the kind of disrespect that leaves invisible bruises, then share your experience in the comments. You never know who might read your words in the middle of the night and feel less alone because of you. And if you are watching this from your living room or kitchen table, or maybe even a hospital waiting room, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing the map light up with people from every corner of the country and every walk of life. because it reminds me that healing does not belong to one age or one place. It belongs to anyone brave enough to take that first step. If this story made you angry, frustrated, heartbroken, or relieved, then say so. Your reaction matters. And if you are someone who finally cut ties with a toxic family member at 50, 60, or even 70 years old, then I hope you know you did not do it too late. Finding peace never has an expiration date. If this video reached you at just the right moment, then subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. I am building a community where survivors and silent fighters can finally speak without fear. And before you scroll, ask yourself this one question. If you had the chance to rewrite your life starting today, what is the very first thing you would choose for yourself? Share that in the comments because your answers might help someone else choose freedom too.